questions, and it's about questions you should be asking your customers and your end users. And just a little bit about my background. I've been in product management for over 15 years now, and I've been at early stage startups that have actually launched products into the market that are now generating, even today, hundreds of millions of dollars of revenue. And so I've helped take products from the very beginning, where it's a blank sheet of paper and you have no clue what the product is or what the market is, to actually launching the product and it being successful. And I was actually part of the early team over at Appfolio, and that company went public just recently. So I've seen it at the very beginning, all throughout the life cycle. Today I'm co-founder of a company called ProductPlan. We do product roadmap software. This talk has nothing to do about ProductPlan. It really draws on my experience being a new product development person, asking customers, potential customers, early on, the right questions to figure out the right thing to build, to figure out the right price to charge, to figure out the real value proposition, and a high enough value proposition that they consider the product to be high enough priority that they actually buy it. And so that's the angle that I'm going to take here today. So some of you probably are managing existing products. Some of you might be part of earlier stage startups. All of these questions that I'm going to cover here today are applicable to those situations. So hopefully you are talking with customers almost every day, and possibly prospects too, new markets, new customers. So if you're not already doing that, that really should become part of your process. And so some of these questions that I'm going to talk about today will give you some fantastic customer insights. So many times I've listened to product managers ask leading questions, or I've heard product managers ask questions in a way that they seem to already know what the answer is. And that really doesn't lead you very far. It doesn't really get to the heart of things. And so what I'm going to talk about are some questions that give you great customer insights that you wouldn't have thought of before. And the reason that you want to do this is you want to uncover true customer value. And these are the things, these customer values, or these pains that you're solving that you uncover, are the things that make great products. So one of the products that I helped figure out and launch was GoToMeeting. And that product was, it's now still very successful in the marketplace. And that solved a real problem. It became a very differentiated product in the marketplace among competitors, where there were 70 different online meeting products in the market at the time. And so what you do through this process is uncover customer value, you discover pains worth solving, you hopefully are asking questions that lead to more insights and other great questions that you can ask. And you're also asking questions that challenge your assumptions, questions that make it so that you are learning things that you didn't know about to begin with. Or maybe challenge preconceived notions that you have about the market or the product. And at the top here, I put that these are open-ended questions. And I think most of you understand, open-ended questions and the value of those. One thing I do want to point out is that these questions and the method that I talk about are, it's not a survey. This is really about going down a path that leads you to discover new things. And a survey doesn't really allow you to do that. So I'm going to go ahead and get started here. But before I do that, I just want to talk a little bit about format. I would really love it if you all participated in this. So I'm going to throw up some questions here. If you all have additional questions that you think are really great that you've asked in the past that are in your arsenal, throw them out there and let's have a discussion about that. Or if you think of derivatives of questions that I have here, I'd love to talk about that. And some of my questions, I think all of them will be applicable in some way, but maybe they won't. Maybe if you're a B2C company, maybe some of these questions aren't appropriate, but hopefully they are. So the result of this is that you're going to wind up with leading innovative features and products that will drive your product roadmap. So Marty Kagan talked a lot today about strategy and about OKRs and tying together those the vision of the product with the strategy and that leading to the roadmap. And this process that I'm going to talk about ties in very well with that. So let's get started. So first question, you probably already know this question, which is why. But I don't think product managers ask this question enough. And I don't think they ask this question enough in the right context. And this is a fantastic question that you should be asking in every interview, because this is how you get to the truth. Why is how you get to the bottom line and the underlying pain, perhaps, that you're solving. How many of you have heard of the 5 whys? Okay, great. A lot of you have. So Eric Ries talks about this in Lean Startup. It's this idea of getting to the root cause or the underlying pain or the real solution. And it's asking a series of why questions about, if you have a question about a particular feature, why somebody would use that. Somebody might throw out an answer to that question. A customer might throw out an answer to the question of why they're using a particular feature. Well, a good product manager doesn't take that at face value. They dive in deeper and they ask, why do you do that? And through that questioning process, you can get to some of the values that customers might get out of using that feature that you hadn't really considered. And oftentimes it's not the things that we think are the obvious answers of why somebody is using a product or a feature. Often it doesn't have much to do with return on investment. And it doesn't really have to do with, making it easy to get a certain job done. It's something maybe even a little more intrinsic. So a good example of that is Go to My PC, another product that I helped launch. And this is a remote control product that helps you connect back to your computer back at the office, which is not so much in use anymore, but believe it or not, this product is still very successful today. And a lot of people say, well, the reason that people use Go to My PC is because it saves time traveling. Or it saves gas because I don't need to go to the office, right? Or it makes it easy for me to get that document that I need in a jiffy. But it's not really that. It's things like, oh, I can stay home and I can watch my kid's soccer game, right? Or I can continue to be productive and be in the office if I'm not feeling well and I don't want to infect other people. So there are all of these other social benefits and kind of these more intrinsic benefits that you get out of using a product like Go to My PC. And so that, by learning those things, by asking the why question again and again, you're going to get to those root reasons. And it's those things that you want to be eventually building into marketing collateral. You want to be building those features and those benefits into the product and reinforcing those benefits. So hopefully you're using this question a lot. Okay, so another great question is, how do you do that today? So if you're building a new product or you're considering adding a new feature, there is nothing better than to understand deeply how somebody is solving that problem today, even if it's done on pencil and paper. So when I helped launch the company called AppFolio, does property management software. So it's B2B software as a service. This was a fantastic question that we used because they were using this archaic software in their offices today, back office software that helped them track rents and help them do the accounting for these rental properties that they were managing. And it's really important to understand how they're doing it today, because if you understand that, if your technology team understands how to do that, you can come up with innovative ways of solving the problem. So, and I'll add to it that there's nothing better than being there in person, seeing how they do that today. And so it was really important for us to be actually sitting in their office and walking with them while they handle a rent check, and walking to their desk and seeing where they put that check, and then seeing how they actually key that into the system and some of the frustrations that they had doing that. So I think this is a really important concept for product managers. How many of you have heard of the Intuit Follow Me Home program? Okay, a few of you. So when Intuit and QuickBooks was first starting, they went to customers who were buying the off-the-shelf product in Staples or wherever they were buying it, and they offered to buy the software for them if the customer gave them permission to come back to their house. And so the product manager would actually go to the customer's house and watch them install the product on their computer. So it wasn't there for technical support, it was there to see the pain in person. And so through that process, you can build better products. Now, if you're conducting interviews over the phone, this is a great question to ask, and documenting those answers. So here's another really great one. Yes?
When you're walking through the day with them, is it purely observation, or are you asking them questions throughout the day? Are you saying, it seems like you're a little bit, or did you find that, is it interactive, or you just don't want to?
No, it was interactive, and I don't know if that's the right way or the wrong way to do it, but I feel that people are doing things in their head and you don't really know why they're doing something. And so it's important to ask the why question during that process. Now, we recorded when we were doing these these observations in their offices, we were actually recording the whole thing. We actually set up video cameras and it wasn't about trying to do the job timing that is done in a lot of manufacturing and other process improvement. It's really about just understanding what's going on. So I think the why question is very important. All right, so this is another great one, particularly for business software. If you are creating B2B software, understanding what your stakeholder feels is important to their job is, I think, a really good thing to understand. So this question can be asked to an end user, or it can be asked to the actual economic buyer of the product. I tend to favor talking to the economic buyers of your product, because even though they may not be the end user, they're the ones who hold the purse strings and actually make those decisions. To me, that's more important. Although certainly user interaction and other stakeholders of the product, that's important. But to understand how they value, what they value in their business is really important. So for example, going back to the property management software example, these people had different reasons that we didn't expect for judging the success of their business. Some of them simply wanted to make more money, right? That's the obvious one that we can assume that everybody wants to do. But that actually wasn't the case. There were other things that they felt were more important. Some wanted to maintain the existing staff they have, but make them more productive. Okay, that makes sense too. A lot of businesses want to do that. Well, that influences the type of product that you build. Some of them wanted to work less so they can be on the golf course more. Some of them wanted to automate the business. Just simply automating the business was important to them because they then wanted to, 2 years later, hand off the business to a son or daughter. So these are the motivations that someone has, and it's important to understand those. Now, if they are metrics driven, such as sales numbers or productivity per employee or something like that, you want to know those because that's how you're going to judge the success of your product. So, and those, as Marty Kagan was talking about, those feed into the strategy, those feed into the success metrics that you later build into the product that drive the product roadmap. How many of you have actually used this sort of question before, something like it? How many of you are B2B? Okay, so probably about half of you. Okay. Okay, so I like this one. And this is one that you can't get the answer to this by outsourcing your customer interviews or by doing a customer survey. You just can't get this. How do you feel about things? How do you feel about your current solution? How do you feel about the competitive product that they're using? How do you feel about the feature that you're using? How do you feel about the price that we're charging? Do you think that's a fair price? And now, the challenge here is that this is extremely subjective, right? You're listening to, if you're in person, you're watching body language. If you're over the phone, you can listen to some nuance in their voice. But again, it's extremely objective. And if somebody says, I think your price is too high, right? So do you take that at face value? I think a lot of customers probably would say that the price is too high. But now you ask the why question. Why is it too high, right? And so it's tying these questions together, I think, is really important. But also, in the interview, being an empathetic product manager, putting yourself in their shoes, asking sensitive follow-up questions, or even later, I'm going to talk about asking challenging questions. I think this is a really important practice to get into. Okay, this is very similar. What's the most frustrating thing about, and it could be your product, or it could be a particular feature that they're using out of the competitive products, or it could be just their day in general. You go into the office, what's the most frustrating thing? When we were validating product roadmap software, when we started talking with product managers, we actually had a different idea. We thought that we were going to be building something else. And it was through this, this question here and other questions like it that we discovered, you know what? That thing that we were going to be building before, that idea that we had, is a good idea, but it's not as important as the product roadmap process. Product managers were extremely frustrated with product road mapping and that whole process. They were frustrated with not being able to communicate to their stakeholders and getting everybody on the same page and all those other things. And so for us, for ProductPlan, this actually influenced our roadmap of what we were going to be building. And so I think that this is a really good one. And again, it's extremely subjective. You really have to listen very closly. And this leads me to another point. I'm not going to talk a whole lot about the actual interview process. I will talk at the end here about how you document your interviews. I have some good tips and some samples on how you can actually document those interviews. But the process, I think it's really important that not just one person be in those interviews and those calls. I think that everybody listens to things differently. So a product manager may hear things differently than an engineer. So if you're doing validation of and discovery of a new potential product, for example, I think it's important to have a small team, to actually have people that represent different groups within the organization, listening, and then after the interview, talking about what they heard. And especially for nuanced questions like this. This is not black and white, this is not binary. So everyone's going to hear things a little bit differently. Okay, so this is a little bit like the magic wand question. How many of you have actually used the magic wand question? If you could wave a magic wand, okay, cool. So this is similar. So what do you wish you could do with whatever it is, this feature or this product that you can't do today? And this is, again, I don't think to be taken at face value. I think it's really important to not look at the answer to this question in isolation, but rather to use it as a starting point for further discussions. Because I think we all know that customers don't actually know what they want. And if they do, a lot of times they put it in terms that they understand or maybe they're used to in a former product or in their world. So if a customer asks you for a feature called X or a report called X, that's a good starting point, but it doesn't mean that you build X. It means that you need to go down the path of understanding why they want that. So, so use questions like this with caution and don't take it with face value because you really need to understand the why behind why they're asking it. So how many of you have actually used this sort of question when you're talking with customers? A few. Good. All right, here's another good one, and this is a little bit of a variation here. How would your day be different if you had this? So this gets to the value of why you want a particular feature. So if somebody asked you for report X, certainly it has to result in some positive benefit to them in their day. Either it makes them more productive, or it helps them accomplish a job that they have, or well, hopefully it does something like that, right? Hopefully it relieves some sort of pain, but it's your job to figure out what that is. So understanding the real value of what that means in terms of time saved, money made, pain relieved, boss happier, right? Those are the things that really matter to people. And so, so asking questions like this kind of sets you down that path to finding out what that really is. Okay, so this is a great follow-up question to this. So if we solve that problem that you have, how much money would you save? How much money would you make? And so how many of you have heard of Alex Osterwalder's business model canvas? I suspect a lot of you have. Okay, so he's also come out with something called the value proposition designer. Has anyone seen this? So a couple of folks have. So the value proposition designer is a great tool that you can use to document money saved, money made, pain relieved, and these other reasons why people use products. And ideally what you're doing is you're saving enough money or making enough money or relieving enough pain and so on that people want to take action. Okay? So this gets to another question that's on my list here. I'm not sure. I think it may be this next one. It's not. So I'll come back to that one. This one here is a great example. If somebody says, I can't do X, or if somebody says, I want a feature like this. Well, you can ask them for examples. Examples of what they do in their day, examples of other products that have a feature like that. So this is a really good one to, when people give you kind of a big statement, or they give you something that's ambiguous, having them actually describe to you what they want is a good follow-up question. Yes.
So all of these seem to have a follow-up, or should have a follow-up question with it anyway. Engage them. It's always a why, this, or give me an example. Could be something throughout the whole conversation, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So is that the question?
Yeah. So we're wanting to pull them out more and more, right?
Yeah. The question is, the statement is, these look like questions that always need follow-up questions, and that's absolutely the case. And these interviews that I'm talking about are often 45-minute interviews. And so I don't know what the standard is for what you do, but I usually arrange deep conversations with people about whatever the topic is at hand. And if it's about a new product, that could be a couple of different longer conversations. So we usually break it up into problem discovery, product discovery, which is where you start actually talking about a solution, and then you follow up with remaining things like pricing and things like that. So it can actually be a series of interviews. And all of those interviews are in depth, and every interview is the same. And so I don't want anybody here to walk away with, here are the 12 questions I need to ask somebody, and here's my script, right? These you have to kind of pick and choose. They're in your, they're in your toolkit to be pulled out at the right time. And this is one of them, and this one, tie it together with something else. So every interview is going to be different, and customers take you down paths that you never really expected. And they'll also present to you opportunities that you didn't know existed to begin with. Okay, so this is one that I like to use in product validation interviews. If this were available today, would you buy or use it? Okay? This is a dangerous one too, because people are naturally nice. When you get somebody on the phone, you've built rapport with them, there's a tendency for them to want to make you happy, right? And so that's where, this question, you don't take this at face value. If somebody says to you, yes, it doesn't mean you high-five everybody in the room and end the call. It means it needs to be followed up with challenging questions like why, or how much money would you save? Those sorts of things. But I think it's worth it to ask this question. I think it's worth asking, how much would you pay? Even though you have to take what they say with a grain of salt. I think it's really worth it to put it out there when you're talking with prospects especially. Okay, here's another one. Most of you have probably heard of the Net Promoter Score and the ultimate question. And this is the ultimate question, which is, why would you recommend our solution to others? And it's asking them, what is the value that you see in our product? So I think that, again, take this with a grain of salt, the answer, and then follow up with the why question and other subsequent questions. So one point I'll make about this question is that the result of this hopefully ties together with what's in your marketing. I would hope that that product and marketing are very closely aligned. And a lot of the time when we've done market validation for a new product, whether it's GoToMeeting or another product, there is quite a bit of the customer's voice in the eventual marketing material, because it really came from customers. It really came from prospects who were saying, this is the pain that you're solving for me, and it's in their voice. And so I think it's really important that, just on my personal soapbox here, that product is very closely aligned with marketing. All right, so this is the last question that I'm going to throw up here, which is, where does solving this problem fall on your priority list? And I think this is where a lot of products fail, because we could be out there pitching our startup or pitching our product, and people are saying, ooh, that's exciting. Wow, that's really interesting. Oh, I love it. But where does it fall in respect to the other important things that are going on in their life, right? Because everything has a cost, and even if your product is if you're adding just a feature to that product, or if your product is free, right? There's still a cost to it. People still need to take their valuable time and implement the product or use the feature. So I think that it's really important for product managers to understand where in the scheme of things solving that problem falls. So how important is it for you to switch out your accounting package, which is really like a heart transplant for any business? Or does that fall on your priority list? How important is it to solve the pain that you're feeling today? And the answer to this, hopefully, is like a long-winded answer, right? And hopefully there are some follow-up questions. But if you can figure out a way that the value that you're providing or the product that you're proposing is like top 5 priorities for the year, well, then you have it made, right? If people can't give you a solid answer, if they say, well, maybe it's a next year initiative for us, well, you probably have more work to do. Has anybody used this question before? The priorities question? Okay, a couple of hands. That's great. I think that's great. Particularly important for new product launches. I think this is really important. Good. Yes?
So some of these really do focus on like newer products. So like for more mature products that have been around for some time, are there some questions outside of these that are really valuable or can give you key insights on an older product that you want to iterate and make a little bit better?
Yeah. I think that's a great question because a lot of us are in maintenance mode sometimes for products. But at any time you are trying to evaluate, are there new excitement features that I want to add to this product? Are there performance improvements that I need to make to the product? Are there existing features where the UI needs to be improved because there are customer complaints, maybe user satisfaction isn't high enough? And so I think a lot of these questions apply to it. Understanding how important performance is to their job function, let's say, if you're doing B2B software. That's important to know. And if at the end of the day, performance doesn't matter, right? If it's not high enough on the priority list, well, maybe there are other things that would give you higher customer value. And so I think that's what you're really trying to uncover with all of this is customer value, whether it's a new product or if it's an existing product that they're using today. Yeah. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about some tips for actually conducting interviews next. But before I do so, does anybody else have a great question that they'd love to ask customers that you wouldn't mind sharing with everyone? I see a hand back here.
I don't know if it's a great question, but it's a pain point for me personally. We have had situations in the past where we go through all these questions, the customer's excited, it's higher on the priority list. We take resources aside, we come up with a product, we come back to the customer and it's like, sorry, you're not interested anymore. So how do we make sure, my question is, how do we make sure in our question toolbox to ask a question to gauge? Because if you take things at the face value, it's not really, they may have other motivations that even they cannot express.
Yeah.
So how
Did
do we
everybody
gauge
hear
that?
question? Did everybody hear that question? Back there? Okay. So I think it's a great question because we can, in our room, we could be listening very, very early stage to what a customer is asking for, yet by the time the feature's delivered, it doesn't quite do it. And for me, the answer is by involving the customer throughout the process. By coming back to them and saying, you had asked for this feature, this is the solution that we're considering, here are actually the prototypes that we're considering. You said that it would save you X amount of money, do you think this would do it? So I think that involving them in the process throughout the way is really important. When we were adding new features to the property management software, we would often do that. We would do the discovery interviews, which is problem discovery, and then we would do solution interviews, which is, we heard this problem, we think this is the way that we're going to solve it, does this match? Will this actually do it for you? And then we had subsequent calls to confirm pricing and other things that were more of the details. I think that process is a really good one. Does anybody else have other questions that they've used when talking with customers? Yes, back there.
Why hasn't this been sorted already? Why haven't you solved it? Why hasn't?
Oh, that's a good question. So the question is, why haven't you solved it already? So a lot of time, customers have solved it. I found at least, and they may be solving it with pencil and paper, or actually more commonly a spreadsheet. They've been solving it with a spreadsheet. So, and so that's an indication to me of a real problem. That if somebody has cobbled together their own solution to a problem, that's a sign. And is anybody familiar with Steve Blank and 4 Steps to the Epiphany? Okay, a few folks. So you want to find these people that have a problem, that know they have a problem, have tried to put together their own solution for a problem, and ideally have the budget to pay for that, solving that problem. Okay, good. So I'm gonna go up with some interview tips, and if we have time, I'd love to have more conversation here. So the first one is about actually getting the interview. So many new products, especially, I have product managers ask me, how do you actually find people to talk with? And I think for a lot of you with existing products, that's not really the case. You have a pool of customers to call from, except, you know, everybody's busy. Everybody needs to, everybody has things that they want to accomplish in a day, and you want to be able to get their time. You want to be able to get that 45 minutes or an hour with them. And so it's important when you're approaching even existing customers to ask what's in it, or to be able to tell them what's in it for them, right? What are you, Mr. Customer, going to get out of this conversation? So it may be being able to share their opinion. It may be the influence of the product that they're already using. And so think through what's in it for them. And I think that the success rate of actually scheduling interviews with customers will be bigger because of it. Okay, so when I'm conducting these interviews, by the time I get to my 30th interview on a particular topic, or 10th interview for that matter, the interviews start to blend together. Has anybody ever experienced that, where you go, oh my God, which customer said that? So I go through a process of first documenting every call. And the documentation is not a transcript of the call. And hopefully you guys aren't transcribing these customer interviews, because what you really want to be doing is distilling it into bullet points, into key takeaways. Because it's the key takeaways that you're looking for that you'll later go back and review to try to make sense of it all. And then I make sense of it with a spreadsheet. And the spreadsheet tries to track patterns. So as a product manager or as a startup founder, it's about pattern recognition, right? You want to be able to find common pain among your market. You want to be able to find that a particular solution delivers a common value across your customers. So when you start to find those patterns, then you know that you have something that is possibly worth building. And the way that I do that is I start to, first of all, collect the bullet point lists of all of my interviews. Sometimes I'll have people in the call document this, or often I'll actually take notes while I conduct the interview. And then I distill it into a spreadsheet where you make little tick marks around the patterns. So it may take a handful of interviews before you start to recognize what the potential patterns are to begin with. And you can use whatever format you want, but I use this sort of spreadsheet where I have the actual customers across the top, and then I have whether it's a pain or it's an objection or it's a value or those sorts of things on the left. And then I just start to make these little tick marks. And again, you're not trying to create something that is a statistically valid sample or a survey. But what you're doing is you're just trying to find patterns. And by the time you do 20 of these, hopefully you're finding patterns, and if you're not, you probably need to go back to the drawing board. Yes?
I'm sorry, but that looks really interesting. The top where you've got the PS, what are those? They look like
there's different codes that you put in. My codes don't matter. In this example here, the P means prospect. So what I do in these interviews, I think it's very important from a product perspective to be able to talk to the right people. And the right people mean the target market that my product is being built for, the persona that my product is being built for. So I want to track demographics. I want to know what size company are they working for. Those sorts of things. And I think that's really important because you don't want to be, not all interview results are equal. Right? So at my company, ProductPlan, we typically don't sell to startups. We sell to larger organizations because they have a bigger problem that needs to be solved. So when I get feedback from somebody or I'm in an interview with somebody from a startup, their feedback is valuable, but I might look at it a little bit differently than I would with a Fortune 5 feedback from a Fortune 500 company, right? So it just depends on who your market is. But I'd like to capture demographics. The other thing is the post-interview follow-up. I think is really important. So I mentioned a 45-minute interview. We'll set aside an hour because the last 15 minutes are used for discussion, whether it's one other person in the room or two other people in the room. I think getting everybody on the same page with what you heard and then distilling the takeaways is really important. I think that's really critical. And that's the way that you build alignment. So that if you have stakeholders from engineering, for example, who are sitting in the room, or you have somebody who represents the sales perspective or marketing perspective, over time, you're going to be building consensus about what to build. So I think that really helps with managing stakeholders as well. All right, so I think I've already said this, but ask the right questions, and yes.
So on that last slide, you were talking about summarizing after you kind of boiled everything down. Do you think it's in your best interest to share your summary with your?
I think that sharing a spreadsheet with numbers is dangerous, personally. I think that executives and stakeholders in particular are looking for the right answer, and that might lead them to think that you have found the answer. Right? When, again, these interviews are very subjective. They're very nuanced. And so, you certainly want to come away with a decision about something, but that's backed up with very ambiguous, sometimes, information. I think what's more powerful to share are quotes that you hear in the interviews that back things up. I think that's much more powerful to stakeholders and others. Actual recordings of the interviews. So all these interviews that I conduct, I always ask for permission to record the interview. But then being able to take little snippets. If somebody says something particularly compelling about what you're talking to them, to be able to grab that snippet, that's great evidence to support what it is that you know needs to be done. Simply pointing them and saying, 27% of our interviews said blah, 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 that's dangerous.
I meant more towards the distilled down after you've summarized, right? Is that a good way to?
I think so, yeah. So I've written a couple page summary documents that describe, here's the consistent problem that we heard. Here is the proposed solution that people said would solve that problem. Here's, that sort of thing. I think that's a great practice. Yeah, absolutely. So let me just summarize here, and then we can open up for questions here in the last few minutes. So if you're not already talking, like I said, to multiple customers in a week, start doing it now. I think that's an important practice among all the other things, among all the other balls that you're juggling, I know. But I think it's that this is going to yield the most evidence for you when you need to be going into those product meetings or the exec meetings where you need to justify what you're doing. This is going to give you the ammo to do it, these customer interviews. Also, think about it like a scientist. These are all hypotheses that you're proposing to potential customers. So you want to go about it and just assume that you're wrong and challenge the assumptions that you have about what is the right thing to build. And again, as I said, it's evidence from these interviews that's going to help influence what's on your roadmap. So I'd love to hear other questions that you have. Okay, so we have about 10 minutes left for Q&A. Yes?
So we talk about asking the right question, but then how about selecting the right prospect to ask this question?
Yeah, that's a great question. So if your company is a startup and you don't know the right customers, then doing a sample of different customer segments, first of all, being able to segment the market, I think is really important. And we did that with the property management software company, where we looked at the whole world of property management, which includes student housing and commercial property management and residential property management and so on. And we broke it up into segments. And within residential property management, we broke that up into the number of units under management. And then so we interviewed companies, potential companies for every one of those segments. And then when we found some evidence of pain, then we zoomed in to that market. And the market that we chose were residential property managers that were managing a certain number of units. From there, that became very obvious to us how to find those customers, right? They all belong to a trade association, for example, that targeted that. Now, for those of you that are in existing companies, this should already be known. You should already have a good handle on target market. And if you don't, then it's a really good opportunity to work with the marketing department and to figure that one out. And sales, too. Yes?
So as a product manager for a startup company, how do I approach a potential client or customer and bring an interview without having it seem like it's a sales call.
Yeah.
You know, nothing worse than like, you know, a sales guy calling you up in the middle of the afternoon and taking an hour of your time.
Yeah.
You know what?
Yeah. So, well, okay, the truth is that it kind of is a sales call,
Yeah.
right? I mean, the first product managers that we talked to for ProductPlan, and the first tests that we ran without having a product, they eventually became our beta users and eventually our customers. So in a sense, it is a sales call, but you don't want to approach it that way. You want to approach it as, hey, Mr. So-and-so, I am working on a new product. It's going to solve this problem. And hopefully, the problem that you're throwing out to them is strong enough that that's going to catch their attention. They're going to say, oh, I have that problem too. And then you're going to say, I have an innovative way. You can say this in the same email or however you do the prospecting. I have an innovative way of solving that problem that's going to cost you half of what, of what your current solution charges. This is just an example of how you go about it. So it gets back to what I was saying earlier about when you're talking with customers, finding out what's in it for them. And if you're potentially solving a big enough problem, it's absolutely worth an hour of their time to talk. So, so that's the way that you approach them. To actually find them, that becomes another question. If it's B2B, finding them on LinkedIn is important. If it's B2C, running ads, for example, to recruit people is good. There are a lot of companies out there that do market research that will find these customer groups for you, and that might be a good way to get started. I highly recommend that you don't let them actually conduct the research themselves. I think it's really important to hear it firsthand. And if you're part of a startup,
I'm doing market research for this.
it's not market research though. I wouldn't put it in terms of market research. You are going to solve a problem that they have. And I don't know the line of business that you're in, but you probably already know what potential savings are from a product like that. And that, if you're speaking of business owners or businesses, that is one way of getting their attention. So the success rate of reaching out like that in B2B is fairly high. For me, it's in the 20 to 25% range. And so if you can reach out to 100 people and wind up talking to 20 or 25, you're doing really well. Yeah. Yes?
Hi. A lot of these questions require the consumer or the customer to dig deeper into their own information. So what is the best way to equip them to engage in the discussion beforehand?
I didn't hear the last part of that.
How should we equip them to engage in the discussion and have all of the information that they need for the interview?
Oh, that's a good question. So I've never been in a situation where I needed to have somebody bring things to the table. Sometimes, if we wanted to see their software that they're using, a lot of we use GoToMeeting for a lot of the customer interactions, and then we could just reverse screen share, and then they could show us the software that they're using. But hopefully you're talking to a domain expert or somebody that has a well-known problem, so they don't need to do any sort of research beforehand. And I don't typically ask them, I don't want to put any roadblocks or hurdles or speed bumps in the way. So I never ask for NDAs. I never ask them to prepare anything in advance. I tell them I'm going to be respectful of their time, and then I follow up with that. If somebody says I have 45 minutes, then be respectful of that. And when you approach 45 minutes, you can ask for more time, but just know that they may not be able to do that. And so I don't want to put a lot of impediments from getting a conversation going with them. Yeah. Yes.
What are your thoughts on different formats? Like you're talking about interviews now. What about surveys, panels?
Yeah.
When is one better than another?
Yeah. I'm not a fan of surveys. I really feel that they're misleading, especially for early stage products or conceptual things. They're great for surveys are great for when you already know what the options are. Is it A, B, C, or D, right? And those are the only possible choices. But in early stage product development, there may be an E, F, G that you may not have thought of. And so I tend to use very subjective interviews like this. And then later, if you need to do a survey if it's a binary question, yes or no, then surveys might be useful. So I'm not a big fan of surveys for product management. And then panel discussions, or like, what did you call them? Like
Panels.
panels, yeah. I think those have their place. There tends to be, and I've done this before. I've done panels where people have a conversation. We buy lunch for a group of people, and then people talk about their different problems. And it's interesting, but there's often a group think thing happening, and people want to kind of impress other people. And so I'm not, I think they have their place, but I prefer one-on-one interviews where you're really diving deep and you're getting into the psychology of why they want to do something. I think that's really important.
That's kind of a funny question. So I work on a B2B software, and sometimes we have customers who have, let's say, 3 or 4 users that actually use our product. Is there a danger in the groupthink in getting, let's say, 3 or 4 users from that customer on a single sort of conversation like this? Or do you need to kind of like isolate those and just do these sort of individual?
Well, that's a good question. So the question is, you have 3 or 4 people who are stakeholders within the customer. And
Right.
do you get them all on the phone at the same time? I think there's value in that, absolutely. Particularly if all 3 people have some sort of influence over the actual purchase or implementation of that feature.
So maybe that's the answer to that question.
Yeah, yeah. So, I mean, you don't want to be conducting these interviews if the person who holds the purse strings isn't available, because people are going to describe this thing, you're going to get all excited, and then you're going to get to purchasing, and they're going to go, oh, we need to budget that 2 years from now, right? So, I think it's important to have the right people in the conversation. I think a user is one of those right people as well. Yeah.
Yeah, when you're doing interviews for new products or new features, what's the number of users you're looking to interview? Not exactly, but is it 5 or 25 or 200?
Yeah, it depends.
And why?
Yeah. Okay. So, with the product management software or the property management software that I was describing, the B2B software, we did 100 interviews in order to figure out the right market segment, in order to figure out the right problems, in order to identify a solution that was small enough and feasible enough for us to implement. And so it was a lot of interviews, and a lot of these interviews were in the office. So that was intense. And then when we wanted to bolt on additional value-added services to that, those are more manageable. And so we would conduct maybe 30 interviews before we got to a point where we understood that this thing that we wanted to bolt on solved a big enough pain, and we were solving it in a good way. And then, it depends on the size of the feature. So if you're looking to do a feature, even today, we'll run prototypes past 5 different customers and have pretty good confidence level that what we're doing is the right thing, or at least the risk of doing the wrong thing is low enough. I think that's probably what you want to be doing, is figuring out, what's the risk if I get this really wrong? And then doing a commensurate number of interviews based on that.
Yeah, so I was wondering, your questions and answers. Do you ever find value in just talking to a user and just exploring their stories? Like getting them to tell you stories about in the space? How do you use story to explore?
Yeah, so so the question is getting somebody just to talk, basically. Yeah. And so I think there's value in that. I do feel like it needs to be guided somewhat. You need to kind of constrain the discussion area or the domain, basically. So maybe focus on a particular problem that they're having. And I think that's great. And a lot of these questions fit into that. How do you feel? What's frustrating? I think it fits into that really well. I think we're out of time, but so I think that's a really great tactic, especially at the very early stages. So thank you all very much.